The color lies in the beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder.
वाह 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 वाह
चलिए.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Sure, over to you. आप बोलिए.
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Three of Meher Baba's favorite couplets of Hafiz, a mystical Persian poet, befitting a slave, carry out every command of the master without any question of why and what. About what you hear from the master, never say it is wrong, because, my dear, the fault lies in your own incapacity to understand him. I am slave of the master who has released me from ignorance. Whatever my master does is of the highest benefit to all concerned. Hafiz.
How often do we remember this, right? But
Absolutely.
if we remember this, I think we are done.
And also it's it's sketched on the inside the portals of Baba's cabin.
Yes, yes, yes.
So whenever I go to Mehrabad, it becomes a again a reconfirmation, again reading that again. Anyway. Okay.
Okay, so before we get started, I'll just reset everybody's context. So we read in sequence the whole of, one second. We read the whole of Maya, the 4 parts.
Then, in response to a question on rereading Maya, Kam gave a proposal that we should read it in the sequence that's better for understanding. And that sequence suggested was part 4 first. And from part 4, we came to part 2. And from part 2, I'm not sure whether it's 3 or 1, but I think it's 3. And then last we do 1. Just as a recap, because this is so dense, I will go over part 4 and part 2 subtitles again, and feel free to stop and ask any questions. Part 4. So, part 4, to borrow Kama's, then you understand Maya from the big picture, the highest level, which is God and Maya, and the idea of the shadow, and things. So first proof that Baba presents is God is about duality. Then he also says that infinite cannot be a dualistic part of the finite. So it can't be two opposing terms or two comparable terms. Namita, you have to mute. Namita, you have to mute. World of finite things is created by Maya. It's the next proof. Illusion of finitehood. The fact that even there is a finitehood, I mean, anything which is in the state of finitehood is necessarily illusion. From there, Namita, you have to mute. I will mute. Yeah, Maya is not limited. That's accepted. And Maya, as finite, is ultimately untrue. So first, the hypothesis is Maya is apparently infinite. And then he goes on to say it cannot be truly infinite in the nature of God's infinity. And that is covered, I think, in another chapter. In God as infinite truth, right, Kama? The idea of infinity in Discourses. No, I was Googling it yesterday, and then I found another Discourses chapter on God as infinite truth. Maybe Kama can throw some light after I just cover chapter 4. Then intellectual difficulty, yeah, he just said, no waste your time, guys. Don't try to understand Maya. And then finally, he gives us the best analogy that we have ever seen in spiritual discourse on Maya, which is Maya being the shadow of God. And then he points out the two states in which not exist. So what are the two states? Quiz question. Anybody? Unmute your mic quickly. No unmuting. Come on,
Yeah.
guys. Two states.
Yes.
Yeah.
The two states, sir. One is when you're in the beyond stage, and one is after you've had your realization, self-realization. Subconscious state and superconscious.
Perfect. 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 Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Yeah,
from there, super morning. You're up and running. You had your coffee, looks like. So knowledge of and then finally the knowledge of realization, and that's the only time when you overcome Maya, and that's where we discussed again the triune nature of the analogy that we have got used to, the pole vault, the scaffolding, whatever. The first one is we use it to understand the nature of the mind, the nature of the ego, or collectively the nature of the ego mind, and finally, even in the case of Maya. So this is where we ended 4, right? Kava, can you just comment on that infinite truth and God, if you recollect, or I can go to part 3. Anything else you want to add here?
Sorry, Jai Baba, can you repeat the question?
No, there's another chapter where this idea of infinity is expounded by Baba in the context of God. Human understanding of infinity.
Right, the spiritual
is
infinity.
Not really what infinity is about. So I should.
The chapter Infinity of the Truth.
Okay.
Before or after love.
God is infinite truth. Correct. So that's what I was reminded of. Ashok, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I wanted to just say that something which retains in my mind is that Maya is a shadow of God. I think that was also very profound. It covers all the 4 parts, but even when in this part 4, that one way to remember and to understand Maya is that Maya is the shadow of God.
Perfect. In that sense, Maya had a very important, or rather huge role in that sense. In the sense, if you are going to give it the status of being a shadow of God, it's something that's here and there. I mean, here and now, all the time till you realize, right? So, in that sense, we it to be negative, to be insignificant. It is not insignificant, but it's not as significant as God. Point number 1, and B, it's not negative because you need that to also do your samskara stuff, right? So, yeah, that's just
didn't mean negative.
Oh, Ravi, I teased you back into class.
Yeah.
We're talking Maya.
Yeah, Baba. I'm in Chicago, so I'm just logging in.
All right, good to see you. So, yeah, any other points other than Ashok, or shall we go to the part 2 subtitles before we continue? Okay, I'll just walk through the subtitles here. Oops, I went to part 1. So whatever time it takes, we finish both the parts we haven't done today, unless we really go off on a tangent for some reason. Okay. So part 2 is all about false beliefs. And first, he describes the shackles of Maya, or how strong the bond or the linkage and the dependence is, how the intellect plays into the hands of the Maya with that strong bonding. Then from there, you go to false beliefs may seem self-evident, right? And there's a very interesting line here. I'll reread. Identification of the physical body is assumed by him instinctively without requiring proof. And he holds the belief all the more strongly because it is independent of rational proof. Counterintuitive. Okay. Identification of the false physical body is assumed by him instinctively without requiring proof. That's the first fallacy. right? We identify, when I'm asked the question, who am I say, this body is Karthik, right? But then he goes on, this belief is held all more strongly because of the absence of rational proof, which is actually correct in a counterintuitive manner. But we take it for granted. That's what it means. Then, of course, there's the three bodies that the I, or the soul in its individualized form, identifies with. So, identification of the physical body, identification of the subtle body, identification with the mental body. And then you have the shedding the last falsehood. We compared it to the sixth plane to seventh plane. And again, the three aspects of thinking, desire, and doing, the soul is actually beyond. And illusion, that soul is the agent. And this is another important thing, right? So we assume an agency function for the operation of the soul in its handling of the sanskaras. Even that is illusory, right? And yeah, and then the belief that the soul is subject to dualistic experience. It is not. It is independent of that. It's only the three bodies that experience the dualistic experiences. And this beautiful word, ensoulment, right? So, nature of ensoulment of mind and body, right? So even the linkage between the bodies and the mind is based on ignorance. That's the point that's being made out. I'll read the last line. The process of ensoulment is based upon ignorance, for the soul in its true nature is eternally unqualified, unmodified, and unlimited. It appears to be qualified, modified, and limited through ignorance or the working of Maya. Okay, so again, a quick pause for any questions. Otherwise, we go to part 3.
Karthik, I just want to have add that the first part of this part 2, it correlates beliefs to values in terms of a practical takeaway. How do we, false beliefs to false values? The first part of the
Correct.
that was something which stuck to me.
That's where it starts. That's where it starts. But then it Ashok, you're right. So it starts with false beliefs and values, and the strength of the beliefs based on the values. I mean, the strength of the values based on the beliefs. But then it goes on to all the other subtitles, which are, it explores the relationships between the bodies, the nature of the relationship with, the individual soul with the different bodies, and the working of Maya in all those three levels. And the fact that the soul is unaffected by it in the bigger picture. So the title is kind of very broadly put, part 2 title. Correct me if I'm wrong. Kama, anything else from your side to summarize part 2?
Perfect.
Kama. He's not unmuting. Okay, so let's get to, Kama.
So hold on, I'm actually outside. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think this part 2 chapter, which started with beliefs, So when we talk about beliefs, there are false beliefs and true beliefs, or the real truth. False beliefs lead to false valuation, which is where we make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a directional process. One comes after the other. Then we also looked at the false identification with the bodies. This was one paragraph summary in Handgot 2, page 338 or 278, and where it said that the consciousness of the soul gets, the soul becomes conscious of its body, but consciousness becomes identified with the bodies. The soul becomes conscious of creation, but the consciousness of the soul gets caught up in creation, which is all duality. So this is Maya or ignorance. So it's good to be conscious of yourself and to be conscious of life outside, but don't get attached to it, because life is like a stage, 16 hours of our waking state. So that is why the three different examples of identification with the gross, subtle, and mental bodies were given. And then, of course, the whole purpose is about God realization, but we have to go through these phases in life. Some people might take, 10 lifetimes. Some people take 1,000 lifetimes. That all depends on the sanskaras and how each person uses intelligent action or unintelligent action. I guess the main problem today is 80% of the people don't have the right knowledge. And the 20% who have the right knowledge are not able to implement it because of powerful samskaras. So it's a game. So that's about it.
Great, thank you. So the game of duality is cannot. Physical page is 379, the part 3 of Maya, transcending the falsehoods of Maya. Counting are the falsehoods that a Maya-ridden person embraces in the true form of freedom. And from the very beginning, falsehoods carry within themselves their own insufficiency and bankruptcy. Sooner or later, they are known to be falsehoods. This brings one to the question, how does one discern the falsehood as falsehood? There is no way out of falsehood except by knowing it as falsehood, but this knowledge of falsehood as falsehood would never come unless it was in some way latent in falsehood from the very beginning. I'll read this line again slowly. There is no way out of falsehood except by knowing it as falsehood. But this knowledge of falsehood as falsehood would never come unless it was in some way latent in falsehood itself from the very beginning. So the knowledge of the fact that something was falsehood needs to be latent right from the beginning. In falsehood, there is suspicion and fear. The acceptance of falsehood is always a forced compromise. Even in the very depths of ignorance, the soul gives some kind of challenge to falsehood. However feeble and inarticulate it might seem to be in its initial stages, it is the beginning of that search for the truth, which ultimately annihilates all falsehood and all ignorance. In the acceptance of a falsehood, there is an ever-going restlessness, a deep suspicion, and a vague fear. For example, when an individual considers himself and others to be identical with the gross body, he cannot completely reconcile himself to this belief. In embracing this false belief, there is a fear of death and fear of losing others. If a person depends for his happiness only upon the possession of forms, he knows in his heart that he is building his castle. Who desperately clings to may give way any day. Hence, he is deeply suspicious of his grounds. Falsehood betrays itself. The individual is restlessly aware of his own insecurity. He knows that something is wrong somewhere and that he is counting upon false hopes. Falsehood is treacherously unreliable. He simply cannot afford to embrace it forever. He might as well garland himself with a poisonous snake or go to sleep on top of a volcano that is only temporarily inactive. Falsehood bears the hallmark of being incomplete and unsatisfactory, temporary and provisional. It points to something else. It appears to the person to be hiding something greater and truer than what it seems to be. Falsehood betrays itself, and in doing so, leads one on to know the truth. of falsehood. Falsehoods are of two types: those that arise due to irregular and loose thinking, and those that arise due to vitiated thinking. Falsehoods that arise due to irregular thinking are less harmful than those that arise from vitiated thinking. The untruths of a purely intellectual nature arise because of some mistake in the application of the intellect, whereas falsehoods that are important from the spiritual point of view arise because of the vitiation of the intellect through the operation of blinding and unreasoning desires. The difference between these. Yeah, go ahead, Ashok.
Some examples of vitiated thinking. That's a very important term, but in our practical life, if somebody could throw some analogies.
Yeah, good question. Any ideas, anyone? What is an example of falsehood erected by vitiated thinking and falsehood just by irregular thinking?
Oh, there is an analogy. The next paragraph. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there's an analogy of let's read that analogy. Makes sense. I think it's the difference between the two. The difference between these two types of falsehood. Yeah, the difference, I start reading. Sure, you can go on mute. Analogy of functional and structural diseases. The difference between these two types of falsehood may be brought out by a physiological analogy. Some disorders of the vital organs of the body are functional and some are structural. Functional diseases arise because of some irregularity in the functioning of a vital organ. In these cases, there is nothing seriously wrong with the structure of the vital organ. It has merely become sluggish or sluggish or irregular and needs only slight stimulation or correction in order to function properly. In structural disorders, the disease comes into existence because of the development of some deformity in the structure or constitution of the vital organ. In these cases, the disorder of the vital organ is much graver in nature. It has become damaged or rendered inefficient due to some intangible factor that has affected the very constitution of the organ. Both types of diseases can be corrected, but it's far easier to correct merely functional disorders than to correct structural ones. So I hope this clarifies. So simple problems, big problems. Basic issues, foundational issues. Vitiated thinking falsehoods caused by vitiated thinking are complex problems, which is foundational and tough to eradicate. Importance of purifying intellect. Falsehoods that arise due to some irregularity in the application of the intellect are like functional disorders, and falsehoods that arise due to the vitiation of the intellect are like structural ones. Just as the functional disorders are easier to correct than the structural, falsehoods arising out of irregularity in the application of the intellect are easier to correct than those that arise due to the vitiation of the intellect. In order to correct a functional disease of a vital organ, all that is necessary is to give it a better tone and strength. If there is a structural disease, it is often necessary to perform an operation. In the same way, if falsehoods arise due to some mistakes in the applications of the intellect, all that is necessary is more carefulness in the application of the intellect. But if falsehoods arise due to vitiation of the intellect, it is necessary to purify the intellect. This requires the painful process of removing those desires and attachments that are responsible for vitiating the intellect. Citadels of Maya.
Can somebody throw some
vitiated thinkings?
Yes, about the vitiated thinking. Can there be some examples or explanation? It's a bit difficult gents to understand. So one idea that comes to me is, say, some people or group of people will have a fundamental, say, belief or on falsehood relating to any religious practice or any other things also. So the whole community will follow that. That is a very bad projection of a vitiated thinking, I think. So can there be any better example for this vitiated thinking which needs a thorough cleaning?
Yes, please.
I'm not able to think of an example. Go ahead.
Some real life examples.
Yeah, I'm also not able to think of anything readily, but I think simple help. Yeah, go ahead, Ravi.
Hello, this is Kama. So
Yeah, go ahead, Kama.
vitiated thinking is very much common sense. The fact that men are superior than men, I mean, men are superior than women, or the women are the weaker sex, is a vitiated thinking. Second is my religious operating system is the only one that matters. That is another form of vitiated thinking. So from that kind of vitiated thinking, we actually do the action of words and deeds, when we discuss something. So that is falsehood or wrong knowledge or false belief system. So that is what this particular chapter is all about. And the functional disorder and structural disorder is about that you can the intellect, the right knowledge, but you're applying it wrong. Like I said, you can have the right intention, but you have the wrong process of probably implementing it. So that is a kind of a functional disorder. Structural disorder is somebody who is got the right knowledge, but the wrong process. You have wrong intention, but the right process. The Babas of the world, the deluded Babas of the world. So that is a structural disorder, because that is what it means that we have desires, and we know desires are a problem towards ego dissolution. So that's why renunciation of desires is very difficult, because it's a structural disorder. So there are many examples like that. So it will take some time to digest these facts. Okay, Baba.
That's useful. At least the two examples that you outlined, based on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I said based on in those two examples, one of the wrong misplaced sense of superiority for male over female, and the second is unbridled focus on superiority, the person's religion over other religions. Both of those are good examples of vitiated thinking, which is well on that. But I'm not looking at any more. Is that a good? Shall we continue on that note?
Karthik, your voice is breaking, Karthik.
Yes. Maybe a little louder, please.
Oh, okay. So, Sunil, do you want to jump in and read if you're comfortable? If there's something in my network again, I don't know. Sure.
Yeah, I could. Sorry, but let me.
Yeah, I'll continue sharing. Yes, there is net.
Yeah, I think the signal is not good today for your side. So, where do I start? Karthik, put your cursor somewhere. Karthik, can you hear me?
Can can you start from Citadels of Maya, please?
Okay, I will.
If you can.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Everybody
Okay,
else
so
can hear me correctly?
this is where we need.
Yes, Sunil.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can.
Good. The falsehoods of vitiated thinking come from initial mistakes in valuation. They arise as a byproduct of intellectual activity, which consists in pursuit of certain accepted values. They come into existence as a part of rationalization and the justification of accepted values, and they owe their hold upon the human mind to their apparent support of those accepted values. If they did not affect human values or their rationalization, they would immediately dwindle into insignificance and lose their grip upon the mind. When false beliefs derive their being and vitality from deep-rooted desires, they are nourished by false seeking. If the error in false beliefs is purely intellectual, it is easy to set right. Give me a minute, please. Where did I? Sorry. If the errors in false belief is purely intellectual, it is easy to set right. But false beliefs that are nourished by false seeking are the citadels of Maya. They involve much more than intellectual error and are not diminished by mere counter assertions of purely intellectual nature. Clarity of perception from inner purity. Elimination of desires and attachments that vitiate thinking is not accomplished purely by sheer intellect. This requires right effort and right action, not by armchair speculation, but by the doing of right things shall spiritual truths be discovered. This is my favorite line, I guess, so far in this book. I'll read again. Elimination of desires and attachments that vitiate thinking is not accomplished purely by sheer intellect. This requires right effort and right action, not by armchair speculation, but by the doing of right things, shall spiritual truths be discovered. Honest action is a preliminary to the elimination of spiritual falsehoods. The perception of spiritual truths requires not merely strenuous and furious thinking, but clear thinking, and true clarity of thought is a fruit of a pure and tranquil mind. God as only truth. Not until the shedding of last vestige of Maya created falsehood is God known as the truth. Only when Maya is completely overcome does there arise the supreme knowledge that God is the only truth. God alone is. All that is not God, all that is impermanent and finite, all that seems to exist within the domain of duality is false. God is one infinite reality. All divisions that are conceived within this reality are falsely conceived. They do not actually exist. God is indivisible. When God is considered divisible, it is due to Maya. The variegated world of multiplicity does not affect the partitioning of God into several different portions. There are different ego minds, different bodies, different forms, but only one soul. When the one soul, God, takes different ego minds and bodies, there are different individualized souls. However, this does not introduce any multiplicity within the one soul itself. The soul is and always remains indivisible. The one indivisible soul is a base of different ego minds and bodies, which do the thinking and acting of various types and which go through innumerable types of dual experiences. But the one indivisible soul is and always remains beyond all thinking and doing and beyond all dual experience. No opinion or ways of thinking within soul. Different opinions or different ways of thinking do not introduce multiplicity within one indivisible soul, for the simple reason that there are no opinions or any ways of thinking within the soul. All the activity of thinking and conclusions drawn therefrom are within the ego mind, which is finite. The individualized soul, as soul does not think, it is only the ego mind that thinks. Thinking and the knowledge that comes through thinking are both possible in the state of imperfect and incomplete knowledge that belongs to finite ego mind. In the individual soul itself, there is neither thinking nor the knowledge that comes through thinking. The individualized soul, as soul, is infinite, though, and infinite intelligence. Thought and infinite intelligence. Sorry. There is no division between the thinker and the thinking and the conclusions of thinking, nor the duality of the subject and the object. Only the ego mind, with the background of the soul, can become the thinker. The individual soul as soul, which is infinite thought and infinite intelligence, does not think or have activity of the intellect. Intellect, with its limited thinking, comes into existence only with the finite ego mind. In the completeness and sufficiency of the infinite intelligence, which is the one soul, there is no need for intellect or its activities. God, the only reality. With the shedding of the last vestige of falsehood created by Maya, the individualized soul not only knows its reality to be different from gross, the subtle, or the mental body, but it knows itself to be God, who is only reality. In this state, the soul knows that the mind, the subtle body, and the physical body were all equally the creations of its own imagination, and that in reality they never existed. It knows that through ignorance, it conceived itself as the mind or the body or the subtle body or the physical body. The individual soul knows that also that in a sense it became the mind, the subtle body, and the gross body, and then identified itself with all these self-created illusions. Karthik?
Sunil, I just want to add, Karthik,
Yeah.
Sunil said,
Yeah, go ahead, Ashok.
the clarity of perception from inner purity. So while he was reading it, sort of an acronym equation came to my mind. So RK plus RA. That is right
knowledge plus right action.
Yes, that's what came to my mind. So that is the practical takeaway to our path. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Kama, do you want to summarize this or shall we go to number one? Anybody has any comments or any questions?
Can you
Go ahead, Mama.
Infinite intelligence. So can anyone elaborate a bit on that?
Jay Baba, I'm in the train, so when I reach a quieter spot, I will try to answer those questions and summarize that. So Sunil can go ahead with the part one if nobody has any other questions. Jay Baba.
All right.
So we'll park the summary as well as the question on infinite intelligence. Am I audible better now?
Yes.
I just moved to mobile internet. Okay.
Yes.
So we'll go now to part one. And Sunil, it's as a better thing you can read it.
All right. Okay.
Just to be careful. Yeah.
Sure. we go to Maya, part 1, false values. Importance of understanding Maya. Everyone wants to know and realize the truth, but truth cannot be known and realized as truth unless ignorance is known and realized as being ignorance. Hence arises the importance of understanding Maya, or the principle of ignorance. People read and hear much about Maya, but few understand what it really is. It is not enough to have a superficial understanding of Maya. It is necessary that Maya should be understood as it is in its reality. To understand Maya, or the principle of ignorance, is to know half the truth of the universe. Ignorance in all its forms must disappear if the soul is to be established in the state of knowledge. A sense of falsehood. Therefore, it is imperatively necessary for humanity to know what is false, to know it to be false, and to get rid of the false by knowing it to be false. What is the essential nature of falsehood? If the true is known as being true, or if the false is known as being false, there is no falsehood, but only form of knowledge. Falsehood consists in taking the true as being false or false as being true, that is, in considering something to be other than what it really is, what in itself it really is. Falsehood is an error in judging the nature of things. Two kinds of knowledge. Broadly speaking, there are two kinds of knowledge: purely intellectual judgments about the facts of existence and judgments of valuation, which imply the appreciation of the worth or importance of things. Purely intellectual judgments or beliefs derive their importance from being related to values in some way. Divorced from values, they have very meager importance in themselves. For example, no one takes much interest in counting exactly the number of leaves on a particular tree, although from a purely theoretical point of view, such information would be a form of knowledge. Such information or knowledge is treated as unimportant because it is not vitally connected with other values. Intellectual knowledge becomes important when it enables man to realize certain values by giving him control over the means to their realization, or when it enters into valuation itself as an important factor, modifying or in some way affecting the accepted values. Just as mistakes in valuation, just as there are two kinds of judgment, there are two kinds of falsehood. Mistakes in accepting as facts those things that are not facts, and mistakes in valuation. Mistakes in valuation can be committed in the following ways. Number one, in taking as important which is unimportant. Number two, in taking as unimportant that which is important. Or number three, in giving to a thing an importance other than importance it really has. All these falsehoods are creations of Maya. Although Maya includes all falsehoods from a spiritual point of view, there are some falsehoods that count and some falsehoods that do not count very much. If a person takes a throne to be higher than it is, it would be a falsehood. But once that does not matter very much. I'm sorry, I read that again. If a person takes a throne to be higher than it is, it would be a falsehood, but one that does not matter very much. On the other hand, if a person regards the throne as the be-all and the end-all of his life, that would be a falsehood which substantially affects the course and significance of his life. On the whole, mistakes in valuation are far more effective in misguiding, perverting, and limiting life than mistakes in purely intellectual judgments about certain objective facts. Mistakes in valuation arise owing to the influence of subjective desires or wants. True values are values that belong to the things in their own right. They are intrinsic. And because they're intrinsic, they are absolute and permanent and not liable to change from time to time or from person to person. False values are derived from desires or wants. They are dependent upon subjective factors, and being dependent upon subjective factors, they are relative and impermanent and are liable to change from time to time and from person to person. For example, examples of relative values. For example, an individual who is very thirsty and is in a desert like Sahara thinks that nothing is more important, more precious than water, while someone who has at hand an abundance of water and who is not very thirsty does not attach the same importance to it. In the same way, a person who is hungry considers food very important, but the individual who has had a full dinner does not even think of food until he's hungry again. The same thing applies to other lusts and belongings, which project imaginary and relative values onto those objects that will fulfill those lusts and longings. False value, derivative and relative. The value of sense objects is great or small according to the intensity or urgency with which they are desired. If these lusts and longings increase, the corresponding objects assume greater importance. If they subside in their intensity or urgency, the objects also lose much of their importance. If the lusts and longings appear intermittently, those objects retain possible value when the lusts and longings are latent and actual value when they are manifested. These are all false values because they are not inherent in the objects themselves. When in the light of true knowledge, all the lusts and longings disappear completely, objects vested with the importance through the working of these lusts and longings immediately lose all their borrowed importance and appear meaningless. Emptiness of sense objects. Just as a coin that is not in current use is treated as false, though it has kind of existence, the objects of lust and longing, when seen in their emptiness, are treated as false, though these objects might continue to have some kind of recognition. They all exist, and they may be known and seen, but they no longer mean the same thing. They hold false promise of fulfillment to an imagination perverted by lust and longing. Yet to tranquil and steady perception, they are seen to have no importance when they are considered as separate from the soul. Taking as important the unimportant. When a loved one dies, there is sorrow and loneliness, but this sense of loss is rooted in attachment to the form independently of the soul. It is the form that has vanished, not the soul. The soul is not dead. In its true nature, it has not even gone away, for it is everywhere. Nonetheless, through attachment to the body, the form was considered important. All longings, desires, emotions, and thoughts were centered upon the form, and when through death the form disappears, there is vacuum, which expresses itself through missing the departed one. If the form as such had not come to be surcharged with false importance, there would be no sorrow in missing the one who has passed away. The feeling of loneliness, the lingering memory of the beloved, the longing that he or she should still be present, the tears of bereavement, and the sighs of separation, they are all due to false valuation, the working of Maya. When an unimportant thing is regarded as important, we have one principal manifestation of the working of Maya. From spiritual point of view, it is a form of ignorance, taking as unimportant the important. On the other hand, the working of Maya also expresses itself by making an important thing look unimportant. In reality, the only thing that has importance is God, but very few persons are really interested in God for his own sake. If the worldly minded turn to God at all, it is mostly for their own selfish and mundane purposes. They seek the gratification of their own desires, hopes, and even revenges through the intervention of the God of their imagination. They do not seek God as truth. They long for all things except the only truth, which they regard as unimportant. This again is the blinding of the vision caused by the working of Maya. People pursue their happiness through everything except God, who is the only unfailing source of abiding joy.
Sunil, I have an observation. Karthik,
Yeah.
I may.
Please.
So basically,
Go ahead.
this chapter, taking as unimportant the important, is very profound because we all get caught up in our material pursuit of our longings and desires, and we miss the the tree. The tree means we are looking at the forest and we miss the tree. The tree is basically the only truth is that is God. So this means actually that we have to really, uh, sort of monitor our thoughts, our words and deeds, that we are only reaching towards God. We are maintaining a balance between our duties and search for God. That's what come out to me. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Thank you, Ashwinji. It's the last para, and after that we can discuss, I guess, wrong importance. The working of Maya also expresses itself by making the mind give to a thing an importance other than the importance it really has. This happens when rituals, ceremonies, and other external religious practices are considered to be ends in themselves. They have their own value as means to an end, as vehicles of life, as mediums of expression. But as soon as they assume claims in their own right, they are being given an importance other than that which belongs to them. When they are considered important in themselves, they bind life instead of serving the purpose of expressing it. When the inessential is allowed to predominate over the essential by giving it wrong importance, one has the third principal form of ignorance concerning valuation. This again is the working of Maya. Jai Baba.
Paragraph.
Sorry, Mamaji, did you say something?
I think you can read it once again, the last paragraph.
Last para. Okay, wrong importance.
Yes, sir.
The working of Maya also expresses itself by making the mind give to a thing an importance other than the importance it really has. This happens when rituals, ceremonies, and other external religious practices are considered to be ends in themselves. They have their own value as means to an end, as vehicles of life, as mediums of expression. But as soon as they assume claims in their own right, they are being given an importance other than which belongs to them. When they are considered important in themselves, they bind life instead of serving the purpose of expressing it. When the inessential is allowed to predominate over the essential by giving it wrong importance, one has the third principal form of ignorance concerning valuation. This again is the working of Maya.
The last sentence, the third principle of Maya. the third principal form of ignorance. What is that? We are not clear about it. In giving a thing an importance other than the importance it really has. Okay.
Valuation.
Nice.
This is about the valuation, I think.
Mamaji, I think if I can attempt to answer. See, I think they're saying that mechanical rituals and ceremonies done just mechanically without, Shraddha or without the respect for what you're doing leads to the creation of karma kanda. I think we read somewhere the karma kanda,
Yes.
the sanskaras which we generate, maybe unknowingly we are doing mechanically, but we are not doing the rituals and ceremonies with the intense the intense respect, I would say, not effort. We put in full effort, but the intense respect which it deserves. I think so. Basically, again, unintelligent action. Anybody else can add to that, Jay Baba?
This whole say chapter 1, false beliefs leading to false valuation, and that leading to actions which are unintelligent. All these things are quite clear now. But with the over-added aspect of sanskaras, so the actions and then the reaction, and then how do we respond or react, all these things comes upon the valuation. So the whole gamut of all that repeated janma is because the sanskaras never say understanding this valuation and repeating itself the wrong things continuously. So those who can understand this valuation can try to arrest this cycle of sanskaras, the opposites. That's how I look at it. So we need to implement this knowledge in our day-to-day life so that we can respond and never react. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Mamaji, very well said. Thank you.
Very beautiful summary. Thank you. Kama, are you in a position to jump in now? Otherwise, jump off at the next station. Finish the call. Finish the call and take the next train. Okay, no problem. No problem. All right. So, any questions that we can discuss? And
that's why I need one more chapter. Maybe how do we say implement this identification of falsehood and also false valuation in the backdrop of our sanskaric load. That is for our day-to-day implementation, and then how do we get out of this vicious cycle?
yeah, that's chapter 5, written by you. Part 5.
We are
No, but I
ready,
have another.
Mamaji.
We are ready. Yes, yes.
We are ready to be disciples. Part 5.
Yes.
Part 5.
Just want to add, probably Mamaji, to your question. Some of the techniques could be in meditation and yoga. Would that answer? I don't know. That's one of the practical ways of trying to, address our sanskaras and maya.
Basically, Ashokji, I think it all boils down to minimizing your lust, greed, anger. If we can do that, maybe a lot of ground can be covered continuously. I think he's explained the valuation so clearly, and we make valuation mistakes in our day-to-day life all the time in the backdrop of what we read. That's what we are doing all the time. Instead of going to the truth, we are always judging things in a different way. And that's because of desires, lust, greed, and anger. So the identification with whatever gross, subtle, mental bodies, and so on. So detachment as much as possible at first before really get the true understanding or knowledge. I think I have a long way to go to reach there, but slowly detach yourself from elements of lust, greed, and anger. Maybe the first step for beginners like me.
All of us.
We all of us are in the same boat, and I agree with what you said. It's all
Yeah, Baba.
Okay, I have some provocation for Agent Provocator. So, don't you think we should do part 1 and then do part 2? Because the way Baba said, now I agree with the 4 being the first. I also agree with 3 being after that. Then maybe it is 1 and 2. The reason being, first you understand values, and then values can create beliefs. And so I think that's my personal opinion, but then we can fight over it.
Sorry, that's wrong.
Okay.
Beliefs, knowledge, fact of knowledge. Okay. And faith comes after belief system. And faith has to do with valuation. Only when you have right valuation, you will have right faith. If you have false valuation, you have false valuation. So values are a subset of beliefs. Or you can say values comes after beliefs. So it's almost like, does knowledge comes first or action? So who comes first? Of course, they are simultaneous. Knowledge comes first and then action. So I think that your you're saying that let's read chapter 1 because first you have to know what is false beliefs. In fact, I have a acronym for Facebook. Facebook is false beliefs. That is why the whistleblower came out, right? They are living in false belief system. And once you understand the beliefs aspect, that has to be implemented. So we will normally go through both false beliefs and true beliefs, real and false. Then after going through experience and being caught up in duality, we then are able to figure out what is the right valuation. And that is where faith comes. As Baba says, faith in yourself, faith in the perfect master, faith in life. First, you have a belief in Baba, but the real faith comes only after Baba gives the grace. Jai Baba.
So can you just help us? I mean, can you define belief and value, or probably give an example, right? That's a good example, the Baba, belief in Baba. But anything like that, just to distinguish beliefs and values?
Okay. I hope the sound is not disturbing you.
Go ahead, you're okay now.
Okay. So, look, these are all different terminologies based on the context of what we are talking about. These 4 chapters are very, very mind-boggling. My first suggestion would be everyone on their own should sit down in the morning and read each chapter, each paragraph, and make your own notes. And I think one day when all of us are ready, each one should give a presentation on what they have learned on these 4 chapters, because I think it will be very interesting to see how each one of us has imbibed and understood, because we'll help each other, frankly. So I think in this very short time period, it's very difficult, but I can say one thing, that right knowledge can be considered as the facts. What you call, there are 2 kinds of judgment: the facts of existence and the valuation, judgments of valuation. So the funny thing is, Baba then in the second paragraph says, instead of judgments, knowledge. It means the same thing. And we see that after we have the purely intellectual judgments, what does that mean? Purely intellectual judgments means right knowledge. But right knowledge is only 1%. It has to be implemented by action. And action of thoughts, words, and deeds is based on right valuation. So right valuation comes after what you call as having the right belief system from right knowledge. That is why falsehood are of three types. And falsehood can also be looked as ignorance. It can also be looked upon as Maya, the principle of ignorance. So it is the same thing, said it in different ways. So I made a note here where basically you can say that false values, mistakes in valuation, wrong values, ignorance, all these are same terminologies. They are talking about the same thing. It's just been by terminology discussed in different ways. All these chapters are interconnected, as you see, because only in the last part, Maya and God and Maya, that Baba actually gives us the definition of Maya in 4 or 5 different ways. Macro level basis, starting with 4 is good. Then you come to false beliefs, because that is the purely intellectual judgments, beliefs. And then you go to number 3, which talks about different kinds of falsehood. And fourth, that is part 1, if we read it as the 4th chapter, it helps us to understand valuation. And it talks about the 3 principal forms of ignorance, which is basically false valuation, mistakes in valuation, or WV, which is what's the word for that? Wrong valuation. We say true, false, real, everything, false, nothing. We don't say true everything because it doesn't sound good. From God speaks, we know that everything and nothing has 2 aspects: real everything, false everything. Real nothing, false nothing. Similarly, knowledge has 2 components: right knowledge, false knowledge. Valuation has right valuation, false valuation. So it's a kind of an interesting quadrant if you look at it. If you have 2 variables, there are 4 combinations. You can have both right knowledge and right valuation. That is what you call as intelligent action. You can have right knowledge, wrong valuation, or wrong knowledge, right valuation. And then you have a 4th quadrant where you have wrong knowledge, wrong valuation. So this is where everybody keeps jumping around in different time periods or stages of life. So what is great about this book is Discourses. It helps us to give us the right knowledge. God Speaks gave us about the theme of creation, the macro aspects which you have nothing to do with. It is how the design is, the grand design is. But what Discourses helps us how to navigate our life in the waking state. The action of thoughts, action of words, action of deeds, because those are the things that create sanskaras, weak sanskaras, strong sanskaras, and powerful sanskaras, good or bad. And that is what is related to the gross body, gross sanskaras, subtle body, subtle sanskaras, and mental body, mental sanskaras. So the whole gamut of discourses and understanding this chapter is about understanding sanskaras, because Maya has to do with sanskaras. And so I would say that read the next 2 chapters, Conditions of Happiness, continuously without anybody asking questions in between. I believe with all your cooperation, if we start reading each chapter continuously and then go back and read each paragraph, and then people can ask questions. Because sometimes the questions are already answered in the subsequent paragraphs. So it kind of, breaks the flow. So I would request that all of us read the chapter, who is reading, and then go back and go through each paragraph, and somebody is reading for the first time the whole chapter, make notes and questions that you have. So we can then be able to absorb the literature much more efficiently. So I would suggest, why don't you start reading the Conditions of Happiness? Jai Baba.
Sunil?
Yes, I could do that, but I'm very tempted to read the last para of page 381 once again. Clarity of perception from inner purity.
There you go.
Elimination of desires and attachments that vitiate thinking is not accomplished purely by sheer intellect. This requires right effort and right action, not by armchair speculation, but by the doing of right things that spiritual truths be discovered. Honest action is a preliminary to the elimination of spiritual falsehoods. The perception of spiritual truth requires not, hold down a bit, merely strenuous and furious thinking, but clear thinking. And true clarity of thought is the fruit of a pure and tranquil mind. Jai Baba, I think we have work to do after this. So knowledge and understanding of valuation and everything is good, but most important is how we apply it. So Jai Baba, please help us to apply it. Jai Baba. We can go to the next chapter, Karthik.
I will. Yeah.
The conditions of happiness. The overcoming of suffering through detachment. Every creature in the world is seeking happiness, and man is no exception. Seemingly, man sets his heart on many kind of things, but ultimately all that he desires or undertakes is for the sake of happiness. If he is keen to have power, it is because he expects to derive happiness from its use. If he strives for money, it is because he thinks it will secure the conditions and means for his happiness. If he seeks knowledge, health, or beauty, science, art, or literature, it is because he feels that his pursuit of happiness is directly dependent upon them. If he struggles for worldly success and fame, it is because he hopes to find happiness in their attainment. Through all his endeavors and pursuits, man wants to be happy. Happiness is the ultimate motive power which drives him in all that he does. Intertwining of pain and pleasure. Intertwining of pleasure and the pain. Everyone seeks to be happy, yet most persons are immersed in some kind of suffering. If at times they do get small installments of happiness in their lives, it is neither unadulterated nor abiding. Their lives are never a series of unmixed pleasures. It moves between the opposites of pain and pleasure, which are entwined like darkened clouds and shining rainbows. The moments of pleasure occasionally appearing in their lives soon vanish like rainbows, which shine in their splendor only to disappear from the sky. If these moments of pleasure leave any trace, it is of a memory that only augments the pain of having lost them. Such memory is an invariable legacy of most pleasures. Desire bears two kinds of fruit. Man does not seek suffering, but it comes to him as an inevitable outcome of very manner in which he seeks happiness. He seeks happiness through the fulfillment of his desires, but such fulfillment is never an assured thing. Hence, in the pursuit of desires, man is also unavoidably preparing for the suffering from their non-fulfillment. The same tree of desires bears two kinds of fruit, one sweet, which is pleasure, and the one bitter, which is suffering. If this tree is allowed to flourish, it cannot be made to yield just one kind of fruit. Those who have bid for one kind of fruit must be ready to have the other one also. the other also. Man pursues pleasure furiously and clings to it fondly when it comes. He tries to avoid the impending suffering desperately and smarts under it with resentment. His fury and fondness are not of much avail, for his pleasure is doomed to fade and disappear one day. And his desperation and resentment are equally of no avail, for he cannot escape the suffering that results. Changing moods. Goaded by multifarious desires, man seeks the pleasures of the world with unabating hope. His zest for pleasures does not remain unalloyed, however, because even when he's reaching the cup for the cup of pleasure, he often has to gulp down the doses of suffering. His enthusiasm for pleasure is abated by suffering, which often follows in the pleasure's wake. He is subject to sudden moods and impulses. Sometimes he is happy and elated, and other times he is unhappy, very unhappy, and downhearted. His moods change as his desires are fulfilled or frustrated. Satisfaction of some desires yields momentary happiness, but this happiness does not last, and it soon leads to the reaction of depression. His moods subject him to ups and downs and to constant change. Suffering caused by desires. Fulfillment of desires does not lead to their termination. They are submerged for a while, only to reappear with added intensity. When a person is hungry, he eats to satisfy the desire, but soon feels hungry again. If he eats too much, even in the fulfillment of his desire, he experiences pain and discomfort. It is the same with all the desires of the world. They can only yield a happiness that is fleeting. Even in the very moment of their fulfillment, the happiness they yield has begun to fade and vanish. Worldly desires can therefore never lead to abiding happiness. On the contrary, they invariably invite unending suffering of many kinds. When an individual is full of worldly desires, a plentiful crop of suffering is unavoidable in store for him. Desire is inevitably the cause of much suffering. This is the law. Mitigation of desires through suffering. If a person experiences or visualizes the suffering that waits upon desires, his desires become mitigated. Sometimes intense suffering makes him detached from worldly life, but this detachment is often set aside because of a fresh flood of desire. Many persons temporarily lose their interest in worldly objects due to the impact of acute suffering brought on by desires. But detachment must be lasting if it is to pay for freedom from desires. There are varying degrees of detachment, and not all of them are lasting. Temporary detachment. Sometimes a person is greatly moved by an unusually strong experience, such as seeing someone die or witnessing a burial or a cremation. Such experiences are thought provoking and they initiate long trains of ideas about futility and emptiness of worldly existence. Upon the pressure of such experiences, the person realizes that one day he must die and take leave of all the worldly objects so dear to him. But these thoughts, as well as detachment born thereof, are short lived. They are soon forgotten, and the person resumes his attachment to the world and its alluring objects. This temporary and passing mood of detachment is known as shamsan vairagya, cremation or burial ground detachment, because it usually arises when witnessing a cremation or a burial and stays in the mind only when in presence of the dead body. Such a mood of detachment is as temporary as it is sudden. It seems to be strong and effective while it lasts, but it is only sustained by vividness of some experience. When the experience vanishes, the mood of detachment also quickly passes without seriously affecting one's general attitude towards life. The illustrative story. The passing mood of detachment might be illustrated by the story of a person who once saw at the theatre a spiritual drama about Gopi Chanda, the great Indian king who renounced everything in pursuit of truth. The drama impressed him so deeply that he, disregarding all his duties to his family, he joined a band of Bairagis, wandering ascetics, belonging to a cult of Gopi Chanda. Renouncing all his former modes of life, he dressed like a Bairagi, shaved his head, and sat under a tree as advised by other members of the group. At first, he plunged into deep meditation, but as the heat of the sun grew stronger, his enthusiasm for meditation began to cool down. As the day went on, he began to feel hungry and thirsty and became very restless and miserable. When the members of his family noticed his absence from home, they became worried about him. After some searching, they found him sitting under the tree in this miserable plight. He had grown haggard and was plainly unhappy. His wife, seeing him in this strange condition, was furious and rushed him to upbraid him. His mood of detachment had flitted away, and as he was truly thoroughly tired of his new life, he took her reproach as a boon from heaven. So silencing her quickly, he put on his turban and ordinary clothes and meekly followed her home. Sometimes the mood of intense dispassion, sometimes the mood of detachment is more lasting and not only endures for a considerable time, but also seriously modifies one's general attitude towards life. This is called Tivra Vairagya or intense dispassion. Such intense dispassion usually arises from some great misfortune, such as the loss of one's own dear ones or loss of property or reputation. Under the influence of this wave of detachment, the person renounces all worldly things. Tivra Vairagya of this type has its own spiritual value, but it is also likely to disappear in the course of time or be disturbed by the onset of a recurring flood of worldly desires. The disgust for the world that a person feels in such cases is due to a powerful impression left by a misfortune, and it does not endure because it is not born of understanding. It is only a severe reaction to life. The kind of detachment, complete detachment, the kind of detachment that really lasts is due to the understanding of suffering and its cause. It is securely based upon the unshakable knowledge that all things of this world are momentary and passing, and that any clinging to them is bound eventually to be a source of pain. Man seeks worldly objects of pleasure and tries to avoid things that bring pain without realizing that he cannot have one and eschew the other. As long as there is attachment to worldly objects of pleasure, he must perpetually invite upon himself the suffering of not having them and the suffering of losing them after having not got them. Lasting detachment, which brings freedom from all desires and attachments, is called Purna Vairagya or complete dispassion. Complete detachment is one of the essential conditions of lasting and true happiness. For the person who has complete detachment no longer creates for himself the suffering that is due to the unending thraldom produced by desires. Opposites. Desirelessness makes the individual firm like a rock. He is neither moved by pleasure nor by sorrow. He is not upset by onslaught of opposites. One who is affected by agreeable things is bound to be affected by disagreeable things. If a person is encouraged in his endeavors by an omen considered auspicious, he is bound to be discouraged by the one considered to be inauspicious. He cannot resist the discouraging effort of an inauspicious omen as long as he derives strength from an auspicious one. The only way not to be upset by omens is the indifferent to auspicious as well as inauspicious omens. Praise and blame. The same is true of the opposites of praise and blame. If a person is pleased by receiving praise, he is bound to be miserable when he receives blame. He cannot keep himself steady under a shower of blame as long as he is inwardly delighted by receiving praise. The only way not to be upset by blame is to be detached from praise also. Only then a person can remain unmoved by these opposites of praise and blame. Then he does not lose his equanimity. The steadiness and equanimity that remain unaffected by any opposite is possible only through complete detachment, which is an essential condition of lasting and true happiness. The individual who has complete detachment is not at the mercy of the opposites of experience, and being free from the thraldom of all desires, he no longer creates his own suffering. Humanity is subject to much suffering, physical and mental suffering. Humanity is subject to much suffering, physical and mental. Of these two, mental suffering is more acute. Those with limited vision think that suffering can only be physical. Their idea of suffering is some kind of illness or torture of body. Mental suffering is worse than physical suffering. Physical suffering sometimes comes as a blessing because it serves the purpose of easing mental suffering by weaning away one's attention from mental suffering. Abiding happiness through desirelessness. It is not right to make much of purely physical sufferings. It can be borne through the exercise of willpower and endurance. The true suffering that counts is mental. Even yogis who can endure great physical suffering find it difficult to keep free from mental suffering, which is rooted in the frustration of desires. If a person does not want anything, he is not unhappy under any adverse circumstances, not even in the jaws of a lion. The state of complete desirelessness is latent in everyone. And when through complete detachment one reaches the state of wanting nothing, one taps the unfailing inner source of eternal and unfading happiness, which is not based upon objects of the world, but is sustained by self-knowledge and self-realization. Jai Baba.
So you
You
can
did well.
read the last line again, please. Last paragraph, last line.
And when through complete detachment one reaches the state of wanting nothing, one taps the unfailing inner source of eternal and unfading happiness, which is not based upon objects of the world, but is sustained by self-knowledge and self-realization. Jai Baba. So thanks, everyone. Kama, you want to summarize this? We done with the chapter reading? Kama, are you there?
Yeah, Jai Baba. Any questions? Okay, I think the last paragraph, a quiz for everybody. Can you see an acronym jumping out of that? I will give you a hint. It starts with S. S for Sam.
Self-knowledge, self-realization, sustained self-knowledge, self-realization.
SOWN.
What?
SOWN.
SOWN, state of wanting nothing.
State of wanting nothing, yeah. Is that the seventh plane, state of wanting nothing? How do we equate this to planes? That thought crossed my mind.
State of wanting nothing is the state of a perfect master or a self-realized being, or somebody who's attained nirvana.
Right.
Because nothing means no sanskaras. No, the ideal plane, the natural self. Actually, the natural self of every human being is state of wanting nothing. Right? We are in our unnatural state. That is why we are going through ups and downs, pleasure and pain, duality. So this chapter, which continues to the next one, of course, with lack of time, but both chapters are very beautiful, because the conditions of happiness is basically giving the one and only thing is renunciation of desires, ROD. Now, the question is, how do you renounce desires? And we know that renunciation, of course, is not part of the 7 realities, but it can be included in that. And, the idea here is renunciation of desires. There have been a couple of examples. One is everyone seeks to be happy. Everyone seeks to be happy, yet most persons are immersed in some kind of suffering. Happiness are like small installments, like shining rainbows, and suffering is like dark clouds. It's an interesting analogy because rainbows don't last too long. And once you have the pleasure of something, it becomes temporary because we know all pleasures of the gross world are temporary because of the universal law of nature of impermanence. So, and the idea is here, Jaji Chanda. So, what we are seeing here is that here we read about 3 kinds of Vairagya. Vairagya, we know we have read about Vivek and Vairagya earlier. And Vivek is discrimination. And discrimination is something that we read from right knowledge, judgments, facts of existence, And so in the chapters on Maya, we understood how discrimination is important because Maya comes in between and creates, wrong knowledge, wrong valuation. Then once you have this knowledge, you have detachment because detachment is a actionable thing, Vairagya. So even detachment is temporary, as we see with the 3 kinds of detachment. Shamshan Bhumi Vairagya, we see somebody dead, we say, oh my God, I'm going to die too. So why am I bothered about the nitty-gritties of life, Then it becomes temporary. Then Tivra Vairagya is intense dispassion, happens when you lose your business, when you lose a high-flying job, when you lose a friend, so on and so forth. But that also becomes temporary because later on, the other sanskaras comes and dominate us. But the only kind of detachment is Purna Vairagya, which is like if you're a smoker, you have to stop smoking, and that is by understanding, which is basically the kind of detachment that really lasts is due to the understanding of suffering, which is what Buddha's postulates was all about. The 3 postulates: suffering is the universal truth, the 3 causes of suffering, desire, aversion, and ignorance. And Baba talks about renunciation of desires. And Buddha said we are all walking Buddhas. So the whole idea is Purna Vairagya, complete detachment or lasting detachment. Now, what is the way to have detachment? Is through desirelessness, renunciation of desires. So one example is given as people are attached to astrology, numerology, Christology, and so many logies. But once you're with Baba, you surrender. You don't care because we are working on our sanskaras. Yes, these things help. Astrology, these things are navigational tools. Palmistry is a kind of a navigational tool, but you should not get attached to these things. So that is one example of inauspicious and auspicious omens. And also praise and blame. In the professional life, the boss gives you a high raise and says, hey, he's a great guy. Sunil is a great professional, and on so on and so forth. Personal family life, we are praised by our children, by our relatives. What a great guy. And then blame also happens. The Rajat Gupta syndrome. He did so many good things, but one false, again, that was an example of false valuation. And one wrong deed, and his whole reputation got contaminated in a way, corrupted. And then the example of physical and mental suffering is very important. Actually, I'm in Juhu to meet a friend who was my batchmate. I know him since 81. I mean, this guy has gone through so many surgeries. It's amazing how he's even alive. Like I call him the walking dead. And he would ask me about physical and suffering, why is this happening? But I understood. And Baba clearly says that physical suffering sometimes comes as a blessing because it serves the purpose of easing mental suffering. And this guy thinks a lot. He's a very smart guy. He's got a very good business. He's got the Midas touch. He was a atheist initially. After going through surgery, because of him, I got introduced to Vipassana. He did it in '93. And what I'm saying is, I can see him as a to reduce the mental suffering. So that is why Baba has said, I think Doc Mama has that, and I've sent it, that 2-page, uh, you know, uh, uh, Mr. Mehernath Iyengar, when my mother was going through cancer, suffering is a benediction. So there is no need to worry, especially physical suffering. And that is why, again, it all comes down to, he says, when a person does not want anything, he's not unhappy under any adverse circumstances, and not even in the jaws of a lion. I mean, that is a very, I mean, just imagining yourself, in the jaws of a lion and thinking of desirelessness. That is something, it's a analogy, of course. So the state of complete desirelessness is latent in everyone. So I think this is a great line, which means everybody has the potential to become God realized because we are already God realized. We don't behave like God with godly attributes. And when through complete detachment, one reaches the state of wanting nothing. So next chapter, you will read about contentment. Okay, this one is overcoming of suffering through detachment. Now, the next chapter is about contentment, love, and God realization, the summary of it. So basically, I have the ABCDEF, awareness, being, contentment, cheerfulness, detachment, desirelessness, dispassion, E for right effort, right? And F for faith, 3 kinds of faith, G for gratitude, godliness, game of duality, so on. So the state of wanting nothing taps the unfailing inner source of eternal and unfading happiness. These are all already latent in all of us. That is why Baba talks about awakening. And once you reach that state, actually, we all go through it in bits and pieces, like in different, depending on our biorhythm. Some days we are completely detached and things go fantastic, and some days we are not. But in the end, the whole idea is to go through this experience of self knowledge and self realization when there is no more desires, and that is latent in us. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
Am I audible?
Yes, visible, audible.
Can I see everyone?
You are already seeing me. Yes.
Oh, what a bunch of good looking
Hey,
people.
Baba.
Jai Baba.
Not appropriately dressed, but please excuse me.
Never mind.
Okay.
It's such a joy to see your
Ravi
face.
will not
You can
agree.
do better than that. Why you wear a shirt?
Ravi will not agree with you. He'll say at least have a shirt or a t-shirt or something like that. Okay.
You know, what I wanted to share about this desirelessness, and not expecting anything from, since we started reading Baba's books, and it kind of put a torchlight into at least my life, and I realized that all my suffering is because I do something and I expect something else in return, and when it doesn't measure up, I keep on being very angry within myself and start misbehaving with that person or that situation. So the first thing was to realize that I'm complete by myself. I don't need anything from anyone, and nobody needs to do anything special for me. And when I do, that's the end of it. It doesn't need to go into an expectation circle, and that's helped me a lot. And then when difficult circumstances come in Baba's journey, I have learned to submit. I understand with my intellect the repercussions or what could happen as we go along. But when I submit, then I'm not fluttering. I'm not deceased. I'm in submission. So I float, knowing that if it is not in line with how I want things to happen, I am sure Baba will give me courage to handle it if it is the other way around. So all these words, some of them stick to me, and they make me a better person. It's been, I think of myself as, in movies they show in Bombay, there are these washermen. They'll put that cloth on the stone and they try to clean it. And every time we read discourses or any books or sharing, I always feel like that cloth, on that stone, and there's something that needs that that leaves me, and it makes me cleaner. So it is, to me, every lesson is like, like that cloth, or going into the Ganges, closing the nose and just dipping down into the water. And when you come out, you're like so fresh, you're so happy, you're so even, there's nothing that flutters within you. And that's been the cleansing journey in reading these books. I don't understand the intellectual or interconnectiveness of the words. Sometimes I feel I'm dyslexic. I don't understand. And I feel very claustrophobic, or I'm saying, what are they talking? What chapters are they referring to? It doesn't come to me. But then when I reflect on it and see what it has done to me, I mean, it's like 200 janmas we have lived in these 2 years, and it's that Baba's magic, which has cleansed us so deeply and brought us together so much. And even if the most difficult situations are thrown at us, we don't see a dead end, we see an opening, and that is only Baba's magic. And Baba's being is so real. Since last year when I visited Mehrabad, um, it's like, being on a swing, um, with flowers on top, and then you're just swinging and the breeze is carrying you, and you swing through life that way. And the wind, the flowers, the fragrance is all Baba, and you just live your life the fullest in that moment. I don't know what is going to happen, which plane, what, I don't know. But I get these beautiful moments of absolute bliss, stillness, in Baba's thought, in Baba's um, feeling. And for some reason, everywhere we look in the house, up, down, we have a Baba photo, or we have a Baba name, or we have a Baba painting. And it's just happened during this 1 year. And it's such an awesome blessing, although we've met none of you. Sunil is desireless. He has stopped wearing shirts also now. So it's that level. It is that
your
level we are
your
looking at.
measure of the thing is really nice. 2 years and 200 janmas. Really great idea.
Really, really. It's been
Yeah.
such a beautiful journey. And you are like, so you are family. We haven't met each other in person, but all feelings is everything is within the heart. We are all images, we are all illusions. Though in reality it remains the fact that none of us, maybe Soma and Karthik, have met. The rest of us, most of us, I mean Sunil and I, with God's
met.
blessings, we meet each other often.
So,
I have met Kama also.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so then, yeah, I've met Kama as well, but that was accidentally.
so,
It was by divine game. Hi,
so
beta.
I
I see your son, Jayanti. Is it?
Yes, he came and peeped through and went.
That's
Yeah.
nice to see. What's his
They're
name?
saying hi to you. Come and say hi.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
Nomita ji, very motivational, very inspirational, and leads with more positivity. And I have a small stanza of a poem for Sunil and for all of us. He talked about putting, into right action. We have the knowledge, but right action. So my lines comes from my school, and I'm inspired after what Nomita has said, and all of you have said in the last 2 years. So it's from the poem On Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. So the woods are lovely, dark and deep,
I have promises.
but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as Kamaji would say, during the sleep time, we are almost godlike. So it's
We are
some
godlike.
time to that.
Not almost. We are godlike.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so basically, the real sleep or the real death is when we get God realized. But this is from my school times, maybe 41 years ago or whatever, and it still holds good, and we can use it in our journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can, Ashokji, I can
Reduce the miles
visualize
a
you
little,
in a
yaar.
boarding school.
200 जन्म तो हो गए. Reduce the miles a little. 200 जन्म हो गए.
मैं मानती हूँ. आपको पता है, before, death was my biggest worry, and I couldn't handle it at all. We've lost 2 fathers this year, and I cannot believe, and I cannot imagine the way I take it. And I keep on telling him, I said, it's so real that there's only one power. Because what is it that holds the body and the soul together? That power. And when it escapes, we don't know where it is. And yet, everything else moves on smoothly, by clockwork. So the remote control is somewhere else. Once we realize that, and we just let go, and that's it. Then Baba and us become just one. It's just thinking that we are in control. Once we let go of that, we know who is in control. And the most important thing is, in Baba's journey, the love you feel, the satisfaction you feel within your heart, there's no fluttering. You're still. And I think that is heaven. I don't know what plane it is, but it's a nice business class seat. I enjoy sitting in it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
I,
As Sunil will vouch for it, I was quite a witch in terms of demanding stuff from him, and like making him feel miserable if he didn't get me gifts on that day or the other, and then making things difficult for him. But this year I haven't demanded much, but people must understand.
But you must have got it. Okay.
Oh, so now we got what this was all about.
We always repeat the last paragraph. So shall we repeat that?
Sunil and
No,
Naveen, life has
I
become.
have a parting statement for everyone to think for the next 1 week. Say this, the statement given was state of wanting nothing. Why the term wanting there? Wanting is desire. State of wanting nothing. So that needs to be modified, I think. You have to think on those lines. So that wanting word is haunting me. Yeah. Okay.
No, if you don't want it, it won't haunt you.
Okay. I don't want it, but that statement says state of wanting
State
nothing.
of wanting nothing.
That's why. Okay.
Thank you. Have a lovely
Jai Baba,
Jai
everybody.
Baba. Have a nice
Jai
Jai
Baba.
Sunday.
Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba.
Bye, Baba,
Weekend.
Jai
everybody.
Baba.
Have a
Jai Baba.
wonderful time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Bye-bye.
great Sunday.
Thank you.
See you all next week. Bye. Jai
Jai
Baba.
Baba.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Baba, you.
Jai Baba.
What happened?